This morning we are looking at Luke chapter 19. And since this is Palm Sunday, we're looking at Jesus' entry into Jerusalem. And we will look at verses 28 clear down to 48. So we'll look at sort of three scenes unfold here. Jesus' triumphal entry, Jesus pausing to grieve over the city, and Jesus bringing some cleansing, some rebuke to the temple. So Luke chapter 19, starting in verse 28. After Jesus had said this, he went on ahead going up to Jerusalem. As he approached Bethpage and Bethany at the hill called the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, 'Why are you untying it?' tell him, 'The Lord needs it.'" Those who were sent ahead went and found it just as he had told them. As they were untying the colt, its owners asked them, "Why are you untying the colt?" They replied, "The Lord needs it." They brought it to Jesus, threw their cloaks on the colt, and put Jesus on it. As he went along, people spread their cloaks on the road. When he came near the place where the road goes down the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully to praise God in loud voices for all the miracles they had seen. "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest." Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." "I tell you," he replied, "if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out." As he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it and said, "If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you." Then he entered the temple area and began driving out those who were selling. "It is written," he said to them, "My house will be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers." Every day he was teaching at the temple, but the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the leaders among the people were trying to kill him. Yet they could not find any way to do it, because all the people hung on his words. It's a story that often, we associate with joyful children waving palm leaves or flags or dancing with banners or, other things. And it was a joyful day, but there is this undercurrent of sadness in this story. And there are several references that, again, because of our context, because you and I live here in the United States of America, we don't have a Jewish background, we're not in Israel, we didn't grow up with the prophecy of the ages being brought to us again and again and again. We miss it, and that's okay. That's just context, right? Nothing wrong with that. Except that when we know the prophetic messages that are in this text, that are being referenced, it helps us to better understand what's going on here. So Jesus comes and he's going into Jerusalem, and Jesus knows. So in the Gospel of Mark, we get several different times when Jesus says, "The Son of Man will go to Jerusalem. He'll be handed over into the hands of sinners, and he'll be put to death." And several of the Gospel writers also tell those stories of Jesus saying to his disciples straight out, "We're going to go up to Jerusalem, and I am going to die. It's going to happen." So Jesus knows what's coming. As he's going to Jerusalem, he knows that this is the last time that he will travel to that city. Not necessarily into the city, because he stays in Bethany throughout the week and he goes back and forth, but to that region. He knows that it's the last time, and as he goes, he sends his disciples ahead, and he specifically tells them, not just, hey, I'm tired and I want to ride on something. Can you go get me something to ride on? Okay, that's not what's happening here. He specifically tells them, go ahead and you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ridden. Untie it and bring it here to me. And if anyone asks, tell them the Lord needs it. Now, Luke doesn't tell us where this comes from. Remember, we've talked about how the different gospel writers all had different perspectives. They all had different ways that they were approaching telling this story about Jesus, the Messiah. Luke was not a Hebrew, he was not a Judean, he wasn't of a Jewish background, he was a Gentile. Matthew does a much better job of showing us exactly where these references are coming from and tying these events back to prophecy. But there's a prophecy here in, let me find it so that I can share it with you. Zechariah 9, verses 9 through 10, and I will read these to you. Zechariah 9 and 10 says, Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, daughter of Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and having salvation, gentle and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. I will take away the chariots from Ephraim and the war horses from Jerusalem. The battle bow will be broken. He will proclaim peace to the nations. His rule will extend from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. So when Jesus says, go ahead and you will find a colt, a small donkey, and bring it back to me so that I can ride on it into the city, Jesus is proclaiming himself the King of Zion, who is not just a political figure, but is this political, prophetic, spiritual leader, someone who will deliver God's people Israel, someone with a specific role to play, coming in, riding on a donkey, not a war horse, but a donkey. Not a big, powerful steed with which he's going to come and slay the enemies, but a colt, a donkey, so that the war horses from Jerusalem will be taken away and the battle bow will be broken. It's a sign of peace. It's a sign of peace that he comes riding on a colt, the foal of a donkey. So Jesus sends his disciples on ahead, and I'm not sure if they would have put two and two together real fast, but it seems as though the crowds did. They knew what was happening. Here comes Jesus, a full-grown man, riding on a not fully grown donkey. This is a prophetic sign, and they pick up on it. So those who were sent ahead, they went, they brought it back. Jesus sat on the colt and started into Jerusalem. When they came near the place where the road goes down the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully to praise God in loud voices for the miracles that they had seen. These miracles, again, confirming that Jesus is the Messiah. This is what the miracles were there to, the miracles were there to show. He's the Messiah. He's come to usher in the kingdom of God. He's come to bring peace to Israel. He's come to bring restoration and healing. This was what they were rejoicing over were the miracles, and also they were proclaiming him king. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest. And the Pharisees in the crowd, these are the people who would have known the law and followed it to the nth degree. They were beyond experts. These were people who didn't just know it all. These were people who practiced it day after day after day. And the Pharisees get kind of a bad rap, right? Oh, the Pharisees. But the reality is, the Pharisees were just trying to be as absolutely faithful to what they believed God wanted them to do. That's it. They were just trying to be as absolutely faithful as possible. They desired to honor and glorify God with their entire lives, down to, Jesus says, you tithe your dill, mint, and cumin. These are these plants you have in your kitchen window, right? Okay, there's the plant. How much is a tenth? Okay, right? like down to the tiniest detail of their lives. You tithe your dill, mint, and cumin. But, he said, they missed it when it came to the heart of the law. You should have also been practicing justice and mercy. You should have also taken it into your heart. So the Pharisees, while they get a bad rap, sometimes we do the same thing, right? So let's not be hard on the Pharisees. But they recognize what's happening here, and they tell Jesus, shut them up. Tell them to stop it. They are proclaiming you king. These things are prophesied about. They are proclaiming you king, Jesus. You need to shut them down. Because in their minds, they had not yet seen enough to be convinced. They had not yet seen enough to believe that Jesus was the Messiah. Here he comes riding into Jerusalem on a colt, and they are worried because it feels like not enough has happened yet. And he tells them, I tell you, if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out. Jesus didn't rebuke the Pharisees. He didn't yell at them. He didn't say, no, you shut up. He said it wouldn't do any good. Jesus himself felt that he was being carried along towards this destiny of the cross. Call it what you want. Destiny, fate, his mission was coming to completion. And he is simply following through these things that will take him there. And he turns to the Pharisees and he says to them, it wouldn't do any good. The things that are going to happen are going to happen. If I tell them to stop saying this, the very stones of the earth will cry out in witness that these things are happening. As he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he stops to weep over it. And he says this very curious thing. For as much as he is being carried along towards this end point of the cross, for as much as events seem to be unfolding of their own accord, Jesus stops and says, if you had known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. And he says the city will be destroyed. And it says they will not leave one stone on another. And then he says these words, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you. As much as Jesus is being carried along in this series of events, Jesus stops to say, maybe it could have been different. I don't have answers about that. I just have questions about that. So I'm not going to give you answers about that this morning, but I want you to look and see that it's there. I want you to look and see that Jesus is saying, if you had only known on this day what would bring you peace, if you only knew, things could have been different if you only knew. If you only had stopped to recognize that on this day, God himself was coming to stand in your presence. If you only knew, things could have been different. He goes into the temple then. And Luke says he begins driving out those who are selling things. And he puts two quotes from two different prophets together. He says, it is written, one, my house will be a house of prayer. And that comes from Isaiah 56. Isaiah 56. Verses 6 and 7. And it says, and foreigners who bind themselves to the Lord to serve him, to love the name of the Lord and to worship him, all who keep the Sabbath without desecrating it, all who hold fast to my covenant, these I will bring to my holy mountain and give them joy in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and sacrifices will be accepted on my altar, for my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations. So Jesus is referring back to Isaiah, who is saying that there will come a time when it will not just be one nationality of people, not just one ethnicity of people will be worshiping God, but it will be from all nations. People from all nations will bring their worship, will bring their sacrifice to the Lord, and it will be accepted. So he references that, and then he references a quote from Jeremiah. Jeremiah 7:11. And I'm going to back up and start in verse 9. So Jeremiah 7:9 through 11. Will you steal and murder, commit adultery and perjury, burn incense to Baal and follow other gods you have not known, and then come and stand before me in this house which bears my name and say, we are safe, safe to do all these detestable things? Has this house which bears my name become a den of robbers to you? But I have been watching, declares the Lord. Those are some pretty harsh words, right? But these are quotes that Jesus is bringing us from the prophets, and the people who would have heard him would have instantly recognized what he was talking about. For you and for me, these are just words, right? Jesus is cleansing the temple because it's become a den of robbers, and we think about, people buying and selling in the temple courts, and that is something that was going on, and that is one of the things he was responding to, but it's bigger than that. It's bigger than that. Jesus is not just rebuking them for setting up market stalls in the temple complex. In some respects, the people who were selling sacrifices at a fair price were providing a service for people who had traveled long distances, who couldn't keep livestock alive with them, or perhaps couldn't keep them from eating the wrong food on the path there. They were providing a needed service. But Jesus is replying not just to that, but to this sense that for their own self-preservation, leadership in the temple have been exercising their power to create sort of political alliances that are not glorifying to God. They're putting their trust in other things. They're putting their faith in other things. It's the same with pretty much all idolatry, right? I believe in God, but I'm going to hedge my bets. And we do that. We do that, right? I trust God, but I'm going to hedge my bets. I trust God, but I'm going to get a second, third, fourth job because I don't quite feel financially stable enough. I trust God, but I'm still going to do this other thing over here that makes me feel more secure. I trust God, but maybe not enough to just go with what God has said. It's when we find ourselves putting God alongside other things. Now, what am I not saying? Do not hear me saying this morning, not to go to the doctor, go to the doctor. Okay? Not to take medication, take medication. Okay? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying when God says to you, come along with me and trust me. And we say, okay, and I'm bringing my cartload of stuff with me. Because I trust you, God, but I'm going to hedge my bets. And this is where the people were. They were in this place of the leadership. I'm not talking about all the people, but the leadership of the people had been looking for ways to create stability that had nothing to do with faithfulness to God. And I think that that's what Jesus is referring to when he stops to weep over Jerusalem and say, if you would have only known what was going to bring you peace, it's not those things. It's not those things. Raising an army is not going to bring you peace. Rebelling against the Romans is not going to bring you peace. In fact, it was rebelling against the Romans that brought destruction. If you would have only known what would bring you peace, but instead, You went after your own ways. Instead, you said, God, I trust you, but I'm going to hedge my bets. In the year 70, the Roman legions had surrounded the city of Jerusalem, and they began to slowly squeeze the life out of the city. They began to come in street by street, systematically ransacking the city. This all culminated in burning and the destruction of the temple. In that victory, the Romans slaughtered thousands. Of those spared from death, thousands more were enslaved and sent to toil in the mines of Egypt. Others were dispersed to arenas throughout the empire to be butchered for the amusement of the public. The temple's sacred relics were taken to Rome, where they were displayed in a celebration of victory. The rebellion continued for another few years and finally was extinguished in 73 AD with the fall of various pockets of resistance, including Masada. This is what Jesus was seeing as he stopped there on the side of the road and looked over Jerusalem. If you would have only known what would bring you peace, but instead by going after your own ways, you are bringing destruction on yourself. Now, you and I don't live in Jerusalem in the 1st century AD. I'm thankful for, lots of reasons that I don't live then. Indoor plumbing is one. Hot water heaters, that's another. But you and I are in the same precarious position, aren't we? How many of us have pursued things we thought would bring us stability, and in the end it brought destruction? How many of us can look back and put our finger on a time in our lives when we thought we had the answer, and we sought after that answer with our whole heart, and in the end it led to destruction, to pain and injury? We do it in relationships. If I just have this relationship, then I'll be secure. And so many times that leads to pain, and it leads to destruction in our lives, woundedness in our lives. We think, if I can just work a little harder, work a little longer, I'll finally reach that place where I'll feel secure. And what do? We sacrifice the vital relationships in our lives. We sacrifice our marriages and our families and our children. We sacrifice our own mental health. We get stressed out and burned out, seeking for that thing that we thought would bring us peace. Now, those are just mundane, everyday things. But there are bigger ways we do it all the time. Not just as individuals, but as communities, as nations. We say, that's the thing that's going to bring us peace, and we go for it with all our hearts, only to find ourselves on the other side, broken and wounded. I wonder in what ways Jesus is standing here beside us today, saying these words over us. If you only you had known what would bring you peace. Can we today? Can we this week? Can we in the weeks to come? Stop and pause and hear those words of Jesus and say, show me. If these things in my life aren't bringing me peace, show me. Show me what will. If seeking after material stability and surrounding myself with people to prop me up isn't going to do it, then show me how to find peace. I believe that Jesus answers that prayer. I believe that's a guarantee. Anytime we come to God and we say, God, show me. Show me what you want. Show me what you have for me. Show me. I believe that's God's heart already. In fact, I think sometimes when we pray that prayer, God goes, finally. 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 That's my challenge to us this week. To take some time and ask God, what is it? Is there something in my life that I am holding on to because I think it's going to bring me peace. And in the end, it's going to leave me worn out. It's going to leave me wounded and broken. And instead, show me where I should be putting my time and my energy, God, because I want peace. We talked about peace. Remember, it's not just an absence of conflict. Peace is that wholeness that God intended for us from the beginning. Wholeness and health in every part of our lives. That's what God wants for us. I'm convinced of that. And if we're convinced of that, we can lay down our and, right? Jesus and whatever we've got over here. We can lay it down. We hang on to those things because we don't quite trust that what God truly wants for us is wholeness and peace. Let's reach out to God and ask him to show us how this applies to us. I've given you in your bulletins a yellow sheet. That is a Holy Week reading guide. So if you have daily devotions, feel free to use this as part of that. If you don't have a daily devotion and you would like to try it out, there it is, just right there for you. The steps on there: follow Jesus through the days of the week on this Holy Week, this Passion Week. And most of them have multiple gospel references. Pick your gospel, go with it. We've been in Luke, so if you want to stay with the Luke track, go right ahead. If you want to pick a different gospel every day, you can do that. Well, for 4 days, and then you'll have to repeat. But choose your own adventure this week with your devotions and follow Jesus as he goes from this triumphal entry to the cross on Friday. Friday, we do have Good Friday Stations of the Cross. It's a community service, and we will walk from St. Andrew's Episcopal Church down to Grace United Methodist. It's a little over a mile. So if mobility is an issue, I want you to know that up front. It's open to any and every person who would like to come. So if you've got a friend who goes to a different church and you want to say, hey, come do this with me, it's open to that. We will start at noon on Good Friday at St. Andrew's, and we will carry the cross and stop to observe different stations, different events that happen on that Good Friday, all the way to Grace United Methodist. And for those who need a ride back, there will be some people providing rides.